This is Suchitra Vijayan, and you're joining us for the Polis Project's Dispatches series. For the last 13 weeks, we have been talking to writers, scholars, thinkers in various communities in resistance as they work and think through the lockdown. Joining us today is Sunil Tamminaina, an activist associated with the Immigrant Workers Solidarity Network in India, a research scholar at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Along with that, we have Bhanupriya Rao, the founder of Behanbox, a web platform for gender data. She has written on about women in politics, agrarian distress, and migration. She has previously worked with the Actionaid and the World Wide Web Foundation on governance, open data, and transparency. Today, we're going to be discussing two very important things. First is the idea of how migrants resist, but also talk to Bhanupriya about their 16 statewide survey. Sunil and Bhanupriya, thank you very much for joining us. Before we start, can you both talk to us about your respective organizations and the work you do?
Thank you, Suchitra. It's indeed a pleasure to be here and talking to you and to your audience. As you had mentioned, I am the founder of Behanbox, and so it's a web platform where we do a lot of stories around gender, and both from a policy perspective, we bring in lots of data, and also, we've recently started a podcast series where we bring in voices of local, reported by local women journalists, but voices of women from semi-urban India. Especially, we thought, and that's because we thought during the lockdown, a lot of these voices will either be missed out in the narratives and so on, and we wondered what was the best way to sort of document them, and we thought a podcast might be because of the reach of audio and so on. So yeah, that's what basically Behanbox does. We are about 6 months old, but I would like to think that we have done some impactful stories up until now. We've during the whole anti-CAA movement, we documented and mapped and tracked all the women-led protests across India. Since the pandemic, we've been doing a section on gender and COVID. So we're trying to see how women are both exercising their agency, but also what are the impact of COVID and the pandemic, both health and all the allied, issues around migration and job losses and so on. So yeah, we're trying to document that and we will continue to do that for the next few months and perhaps years. I don't know. Yeah, so that's what we do, Suchitra.
Sunil, can you talk to us about your organization's work and what you do as well, please?
Sure. Thanks, Suchitra, for having me. Migrant Workers Solidarity Network, we started out as a helpline when the entire migrant worker crisis has come out in the open. Migrant workers were facing crisis for decades now, but since the beginning of the lockdown, the crisis has become more visible. We started out as a helpline, a nationwide helpline of about 15 numbers was circulated in 9 languages for coordinating relief activity. Then we started out doing more political campaigns as well around issues of migrant workers over the past 2.5 months, right since the time of when the migrant worker movement was stopped at the end of March. We took a campaign around ensuring food, wages, shelter, as well as on a more long-term basis, we were advocating a comprehensive legislation for citizenship and workplace rights as well. And then through the course of the crisis, we were taking out campaigns to let them go home, to make the trains that were being run to be made free for them, as well as the latest one, the project that we took out was the migrant worker resistance map. I think we can talk about it more in the later section. Yeah.
Sunil, since you already...
We are a group of, although we came together only after the beginning of the lockdown, most of us are engaged in various kinds of activism even before this. Yeah.
Sunil, I kind of want to start with the migrant resistance map. Tell us what the migrant resistance map is and what does it document and why you started documenting it.
The migrant workers resistance map documents all the migrant workers protests that have happened during the lockdown, since the beginning of the lockdown, and continuing to document. The objective behind documenting migrant workers protests, there are a lot of other valuable documentation works that are happening, but the objective behind we doing something like this is twofold, I would say. One, on a more immediate basis, uh, I mean, we have been coordinating relief activities, but uh, after the beginning of the crisis, say 1.5 months into it, the discourse, there was a lot of sympathy that has been generated surrounding the issues of migrant workers across various sections of Indian society. But most of that conversation was happening only around in a framework which is in terms of relief, charity, as migrant workers who needs to be helped out. I mean, inadvertently, I think we felt that has led to a stage where workers were being conceptualized as, perpetual victims who needs to be helped out. So, I mean, also there have been we knew that there have been hundreds of migrant workers protests that have happened until then, but none of them, most of them haven't had media coverage at all. I mean, obviously the national media, the Delhi based media, I mean, hardly cares for them, cares for the real issues, as well as even few which were also covered in the framework of say violation of physical distancing norms, law and order problems, or even sometimes in blatant communal terms, Hindu Muslim, like the one in Bandra on April 14th. So, in order to flip that particular narrative and bring out a conceptualization of migrant worker who actually has resisted injustices done to him, absurd rules imposed on him, the oppressive conditions that he or she was living in. That's more immediate objective of flipping that particular narrative and bringing the political migrant worker out more in the open. On a more long term basis, we also would like to, work on this particular documentation to evolve possibilities of uh, uh, collectivizing, organizing amongst migrant workers, embedded with other research works, other organizing initiatives, etc. I think broadly these two have been the objectives of undertaking this particular project. So far, we have documented 158 protests, which altogether involved more than 1 lakh migrant workers directly getting involved across the country. Uh, I should say this has been an incomplete exercise. There are inherent limitations in this particular exercise, so the real numbers would be far higher than what we could document so far. Yeah.
Uh, Bhanupriya, can you talk to us about your work, which is a 16-state survey that looks at the ASHA workers? Can you just talk to us about the survey and what it did and the findings that came out of it?
Yeah. So, Suchitra, I'm sure a lot of us already know who Ashas are, but I thought I'll just do a little introduction to the Asha system, our Asha workers. So, Asha workers are India's frontline healthcare workers. They're basically, it's an acronym for Accredited Social Health Activists. So in 2005, when the National Health Mission was formed, and community health took over precedence, and the government decided that it should be rooted in community health. They decided to recruit women from the community with a certain educational background, between 5th to 10th standard onwards. and then have them as voluntary workers. See, this is how it started, and I'm building this because this is so important to understanding how governments are treating ASHA workers today. So when the program started and ASHA workers were recruited, they were recruited as volunteer workers who were supposed to spend 2-3 hours a day as apart from the daily wage work or whatever work they were doing, just to help out with the health system, create awareness about schemes and maternal and child health and so on. And over the period, what has happened is, and I've talked to several ASHA workers who said that in the first, I think, even 10 years of the system as well, they were not being paid anything at all, like free work. And slowly, when with the unions taking up the cause and everything, government started setting what is called incentives per task that they were supposed to do. So, and this is also important because ASHAs are not a paid workforce. They don't get fixed salaries, except now in some states like Andhra, where they're paid 10K, and Haryana about 4K, and so on. I think there are about 6 states in totality in India where they pay them a fixed salary. But mostly what ASHAs are paid is an incentive structure based on the number of tasks that they do, and so on. So it's a variable pay. Now, coming to the pandemic, it's also important to mention that over the years, governments have stretched the work of ASHA workers to like from 2 hours to 8 hours a day in normal times, pre-pandemic times, 8 to 10 hours a day, because they were supposed to do antenatal care, postnatal care. So, I mean, if a woman is in labor, they're supposed to take them to the district hospitals, and, it could be any time in the night, and government was not paying anything for transport, or even, if they went to the district hospitals, the overnight stays or anything. So essentially, so Lakshana Nandi, who's a public health activist, I had a chat with her recently, and what she says, and it's very instructive, is that ASHA workers have basically subsidized the Indian healthcare system. They've actually subsidized the government, because they've put in a lot of their expenditure out of their own pockets over the years. And and also over the years, what they've been recruited to do every time is, there is an election somewhere, recruit ASHA workers to do the surveys. There's a, I don't know, civic duty somewhere, recruit them to do the survey. So it's over the years, their scope of work has like increased outside the remit of their healthcare work. So this is important because, during the pandemic, what has happened is, the government of India and all states were totally underprepared for the pandemic, and so the burden of sort of community contact tracing and every sort of important work within the community, screening, monitoring, putting people under quarantine, ensuring that they are in quarantine, and collecting all this data and feeding into the government systems for them to come and do tests for people that they've identified as positive, and so on. All this fell on the ASHA. So what was happening is they were working for like more than 12 to 16 hours a day, and this is like a basic minimum I'm talking about. So when the first reports of ASHAs being like extremely overburdened, and by all means, we are not the only people who've talked about ASHAs. There have been very, very good reports from both Nishita Jha, whose report was the first I had read, Bhanupriya Rao, who's done a very comprehensive report early in March and April. And so from there, what we thought was to sort of, now that we're in May, when we did that, we were in May. So in May, what we thought was we should, apart from understanding what is happening now on the ground with the ASHAs, we should also track some of the commitments that the government of India had made to the ASHA workers. So in April, what happened was the government of India came out with a circular rather belatedly, because the pandemic activities had started in March itself, and in many states before March, like in Kerala, they started in January itself. So in April, rather belatedly, they came out with a circular saying that Ashas will be given a 1,000 rupees incentive per month, like 1,000 rupees, okay, incentive per month for doing all this work, extra COVID work. And what they should also get from the state governments is the regular incentives, because a lot of these incentives were for activities that were supposedly suspended during the lockdown. But what really happened was they were not suspended. They just continued in several other forms. For example, they were not taking pregnant women, but they were checking on them on the phone, or, they were not doing immunization outreach activities, but they were sort of they were asking people to go to the PHC to get their vaccines and so on. So what we thought then was to monitor how so the government had very clearly in its government order in April said that all the first you give them an incentive of 1,000 rupees every month from starting from January to June for the 6 months. Then you give them all their regular incentives. Also give them the 2,000 rupees is a incentive that that the central government gives to the Asha workers conditioned on certain tasks finishing. So basically instructing the state governments to give them all these sort of payments. And what we thought then was to track and see whether we are into the month of March, whether all these payments were made at all, and and so on. So that's where, and also we wanted to see by May whether Ashas were getting PPEs already, whether their workload had had transformed in any way, whether they had received any extra training already from the state governments, and so on. So basically following up on what earlier journalists already did, but with a more monitoring eye on the whole system. And so therefore we thought we should have a representative sample. So we did the study in the survey in about 16 states. Well, not about exactly 16 states. All the four southern states except Tamil Nadu. All the western states, all Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and so on. I'm forgetting Uttar Pradesh in the north. And what we found was that 75% of the states that we had talked to had not paid the 1,000 rupees COVID incentive, and except for Maharashtra and Kerala, none of the states were paying between January and June, which is what the central government order said. So basically, you're supposed to give them a meager amount of 1,000 rupees. Even there, your states are cutting corners on how between the period within which they would pay. Now, let's say that many states would argue that, oh, but we didn't start our COVID activities until March, right? But then what we found was a lot of the states were giving this incentive between April and June, or they had promised. Some of them hadn't even come up with a like a promise of what, or rather an announcement of what they were going to, for which months they were going to pay for. So our argument was that if you are saying that your COVID activities in every state had begun by March, then why are you paying from April? Like why are you cutting like even that 1,000 rupee incentive, which basically Asha worker said works out to 33 rupees a day. You rather not give us this kind of charity. It's like pennies of charity you're throwing at us. You don't give us masks or sanitizers. That's how much it would cost us to buy a sanitizer, 30 rupees, and it will last for just about 10 days. The state gives them only one sanitizer a month to be used. So these were the parameters we were tracking, and what we found was that states were really cutting, not paying this incentive. On the other hand, what they were doing is they had completely cut down on all the incentives for activities like immunization, healthcare, antenatal care, postnatal care, home-based care, this, that, and the other, while making them do all these works as well. So I was at a webinar day before where the state representative of the National Health Mission of Jharkhand very proudly declared that, oh, look, we had started training Ashas by February and so on. And my question to her was, If you had started training Ashas in February, did you not consider that as work? Then why are you paying from April, right? So that was the reason why we wanted to do this survey, to see where we are at the moment, and how and the findings were not very surprising, because Ashas have always been at the margins of the healthcare system. And in the pandemic, what states are doing is, while extracting crucial labor from them, which without which the whole India's COVID response would collapse. While doing that, they are really treating them like they're pushing them even into like real financial ruin and distress, because many of them, actually a lot of them come from very poor families, Dalits, Adivasis. So you can, and many of them are single breadwinners now, because they're either their family members have lost their jobs, or they're single women themselves. So the question to ask is, why is the Indian government doing this?
We'll come back more to this gendered aspect of the research that you do. Sunil, I kind of wanted to go back to your resistance map and talk about the data that you've collected. What I'm looking at the data that you guys have collected. So you already said that 158 protests have been documented. There could be more. This is over 1 lakh immigrant workers doing this. But what I'm really curious about is the statewide breakdown that you've done, with Gujarat being on the top. Can you kind of lay that out for us? Why is it that we have such high numbers in Gujarat, and where are these migrants resisting? How are they resisting in these states?
Uh, One peculiar aspect of Gujarat, I think, is the intense exploitation that migrant workers face in that particular state. The implementation of minimal regulations are almost non-existent. Another aspect during this particular lockdown, vis-a-vis Gujarat, regarding migrant workers protests, is that is one particular state where there have been migrant workers protests right since the beginning of the lockdown. I mean, since the end of March, there were major protests in Surat, Ahmedabad, in towards the end of March, on April 10th, on April 14th, towards the end of April, on May 3rd, if I'm getting the date right. And most of these protests are also quite militant in their nature. Also, I think that also reflects the amount of distress that they were facing, even in terms of more immediate needs of food and shelter, as well as the long run working class situation in Gujarat. Perhaps we documented about 21 protests in Gujarat so far. Most of these workers are also from states like Odisha. For example, in Surat, the government workers, etc. The demands raised have been, wages, food, going back home, right since the beginning of the lockdown. Yeah.
We have another question. We have a question for you, Sunil. Is that why is it that we don't hear about the resistance that happens in these communities? Why has the media documentation excessively focused on immigrants? Has sorry, 1 minute. Why have the protests been? Why have journalists documented the protest as immigrants, as vulnerable bodies that need to be protected, people who are constantly on the receiving end of violence, but not as communities that resist?
That's in the nature of our media, I guess. With the corporate control media that we have, as well as the establishment's control over the media. Uh, I mean, putting out the real narrative of how migrant workers in large numbers are protesting, resisting against government policies. I guess, that would be detrimental to a lot of media houses' profits, or even they being in good looks of the past to be. On the larger question of uh, on the larger question of migrant workers protests per se, what is the significance of migrant workers protests? I would like to elaborate on this a bit. I mean, uh, Migrant workers are people from some other state in search of livelihood, coming to another state, working there in very precarious conditions, where any act of, say, raising any demand would mean that they may be terminated. That's the with the amount of social economic insecurity, lack of social networks in the place they work, sometimes even cultural insecurities, like as basic as not knowing the local language, would mean that they are in a completely precarious precarious situation, as well as decades of neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism has meant that uh, even the old scale industrial towns have also shifted, in the sense that hardly any responsibilities of housing, health, education are guaranteed to any of these workers. The big industries that employ them, even within the formal sector, there has been large scale informalization through contracting, to lack of social security, through meager wages, etc. So the very act of these migrant workers coming together during the lockdown, of course, the level of distress during the lockdown has been the immediate trigger. But the I mean I mean as basic uh, right as unionizing is something that they only can dream of so far. So the very act of coming together and resisting these oppressive conditions put on them can be very significant, in the sense that capitalism in today's India is surviving largely on migrant work. Migrant workers play a crucial role for capitalism today. Their labor is being extracted in very exploitative conditions. But if at all, these workers who so far, due to various conditions, which some of which I've just listed, uh, couldn't organize themselves, couldn't access their very basic rights. If these workers are beginning to uh, come together, resist, then the very basis of uh, capitalism, that is the form of capitalism that we are in, can be challenged. If this is a long shot what I'm saying, but the seeds. I'm just trying to make sense of the significance of the protests that migrant workers have organized, and how and what that can ultimately lead to, if at all they are subjective forces consciously organizing them, of course, which currently are non-existent, largely. But yeah, I mean,
So we are still taking audience live questions. So if you have more questions, please send it. We have another 15 minutes left, so we will continue taking more questions. Um, Bhanupriya, I really wanted to, some of the issues that you raised, it was very interesting to me, is you talk about the lack of gender documentation of the crisis. What does it mean? What does it mean to say there's a lack of gender documentation of crisis? Can you please walk us through that?
Yeah, actually, so even when the whole migrant crisis was developing, what was very apparent was migrant workers walking back home, and the images and the stories and everything around it. What I thought was missing was that the migrant worker who's walking back home, or wanting to go back home, is stuck at their workplace and so on, is a woman too, right? And that whole sort of understanding of the migrant worker was largely very male. And what was what were the experiences of women that were walking back. In fact, I remember someone on Twitter, actually Jivika on Twitter, saying, raising this question, and in the first instance, that there is a complete lack of the gender nature of the woman migrant, or the migrant worker walking back home. Now, very early on, I had done last year. I had worked on. I reported on migrant, like interstate migrant workers in Andhra, in the chili fields of Guntur. So these people come from Kurnool, which is a very arid, drought-prone area in western AP. Every year, like clockwork, they will all move to Guntur's chili fields, which are like very remunerative. Guntur is like a rich area of Andhra, and so for 3-4 months they will live in the heat, just under tarpaulin sheets, and they will just pick chilies for about 200 rupees a day and so on. Now, 50% of, or rather more, of this workforce is women and children, uh, right? But when we and very early on, when this whole crisis was developing and everybody wanted to go home, there was this whole question of how they wanted to go back home, because a lot of them had left. What they do is they leave their families, like young children with those school going children, with their grandparents, who are very old to barely look after themselves, and what are they going to look after their children? So it's the children, like 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old girls, again, that cook, or even go and get PDS rice from the nearest shop and everything. The whole care burden falls on the girls of the house. So what happens then is that when women are stuck in, say, chili fields, are we documenting their anxiety? Women were very anxious that, we don't know what's going to happen to our families back home. How is it that as middle classes or above, we are supposed to be anxious about our families that are, that we are separated from somewhere else and so on? And why are we not paying attention to women stuck in the chili fields, for example, who are saying that, schools are closed, there will be no midday meals, so it's our kids will go hungry, our girls will go hungry. So I felt that a lot of these issues are missing. This kind of documentation is missing. What is the experience of a woman who's a migrant worker? What is her voice? What is her anxiety? What does her resistance look like, for example? So these we felt, and Jivika and others raised a very important question over Twitter, that migrant women walking back, some of them were heavily pregnant. They had delivered on the way. What sort of arrangements were even made? I mean, we all know that. What about their menstrual health? What about their other sort of physical health? What about, are we looking at, or for example, are we looking at what is the effect of this going to be on, say, sex workers? I recently got a notification from one of the sex workers networks in Andhra, which said that they're not even getting their PDS rations. And Andhra government had some time ago, in the undivided state, come up with a government order that secured the food and other rights of sex workers. Today they're being violated. Are we monitoring that? So I think I know there is so much around it, and maybe the people documenting a few, and that is why I feel that the way that migrant workers networks have done, Anandita, Jivika and others, or Sunil and others, I think there needs to be a more collaborative effort in trying to document all this, because we will be missing out a whole lot of things. We will be missing out on documenting the big mental health crisis that everyone will be staring at, and it affects different classes and different castes differently. So I think we need, that's what I meant by the whole gendered documentation of the pandemic.
Um, Again, both Sunil and Bhanupriya have expressed interest in collaborating with many people. So after the event is over, you can actually find links in our Polis page and campaigns. So please reach out to them. In the meantime, we have another question. It says, I think it's addressed to both of you. Any way we can organize with undocumented migrants given NRC fear alongside Indian migrant labor?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the Hindutva state that Hindutva government that we have right now. I mean, the NRC, the NPR, etc. I mean, with huge sections of migrant workers being coming from oppressed backgrounds. I mean, Dalits, Muslims, Adivasis, etc. And the threat of NRC hanging right over them. Uh, I mean, the I mean, the lockdown has been really hard. I mean, it's obvious in stating that, but looking from here, I mean, having learned the nature of uh, the nature of the system that workers have been living in, and most of them being, as I was saying, coming from oppressed backgrounds, most of them have seen the true face of the system. They as a matter of fact, they do know, but before this particular lockdown as well. But through the lockdown, it's really hard on them. Uh, we can only hope that, having seen the true nature of the exploitative system that we are living in, which is being furthered by communal Hindutva policies by this particular government, we can only hope that that would lead to some amount of, uh, I mean, awakening of, I mean, uh, consciousness. I mean, and then lead to some organizing that uh, to resist these policies. As Bhanupriya was saying, I mean, a lot of collaboration needs to happen. United struggles need to be fought. But I mean, in effect, the government has announced lockdown. We need to be really clear on this. I mean, the lockdown is a measure that actually escalates the. Uh, I mean, it's said to be the fight against COVID-19, but it's actually, I would say, it's a war on the toiling people in this country. Uh, uh, I mean, in the name of fighting a disease. I mean, I would like to elaborate why I was saying this. Even many circles within the left were characterizing this particular lockdown as something like unprepared lockdown or unplanned lockdown. I mean, I think we need to call it what it is. I mean, it's not unplanned or unprepared, but I guess the idea of the such a harsh lockdown to tackle a disease is actually, I mean, to further exploit the toiling people in this country, to escalate the war that the system is having against them, in the sense that how do we tackle a health crisis? I mean, a health crisis of an enormous proportion that COVID-19 is. You would want to mobilize as much health infrastructure that is at your disposal. I mean, in India, there are huge private, big corporate hospitals that have been virtually doing nothing during the first 1.5 month of the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, the profits come first for them. They were, as Bhanupriya was saying, I mean, for medical professionals, there were huge shortage of PPEs, masks, etc., which should have been prepared on a war footing, I should say, mobilizing all the resources that the government has in the country, which would have meant significant redistribution, significant shift from the neoliberal paradigm under which the government is under, which the government doesn't want to do at all, because it's obviously within the hands of the capitalist class. Because of which, I mean, it just chose an easy way to punish the toiling people in this country, because it cannot take measures which actually would solve the health crisis as well as the social crisis to whatever extent possible. I mean, I would like to add that even a newspaper like Financial Express, Financial Times, which is considered the London-based Financial Times, which is considered the ideologue of neoliberal capital, was put out an editorial, I think, last month, advocating. I mean, advocating is more public expenditure on social sectors. I mean, that's for that Financial Times was looking to save capitalism by doing this adjustment policies, but truly, true way of solving these crises would require large-scale redistribution of resources, which the government wouldn't want to do, because of which I mean, harsh lockdown was announced, and the entire responsibility was put on the individuals. I mean, our prime minister, who's fond of giving speeches, was saying, I mean, आप corona say like if you get corona, you are responsible. So stay at home rather than doing nothing to ramp up the health infrastructure. Uh, yeah, I think I hope that answers.
Bhanupriya, I kind of want to hear your take as well. Do you think it's possible at this point in time to organize the undocumented migrants, given the fear of NRC, with the current Indian migrants? I kind of want to hear what you think about it, given the gendered nature of the work that and the research that you guys do.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things, in fact, I think two things we should be doing. One, staying very, very alert, because as we know the nature of this government, particularly, and any government which has intentions such as the NRC or exclusionary policies, are always constantly thinking at the back of their minds, how do we sneak in another sort of harshness and another sort of blow on people that we are not comfortable with, that we don't like, and sort of have so yeah, I think we need to be very, very alert, especially around the NRC and CAA, and there is no reason, or there is just no chance we should be taking where we become lax and we think, oh, acha, lockdown ke baad, or after the lockdown, this is at the back burner. No, it isn't. I think we really need to be alert about it. In terms of how do we document the undocumented, I think, there are some groups in Assam that are doing it, but that's where I again come back to my earlier point about how we need to reach out. We need to have those collaborative sort of relationships, because one person sitting, or even one organization, however large it might be, is never going to do this. And I think in the West, in some ways, people have learned this, where journalism is becoming a lot more collaborative. I'm afraid to say in India we're still not. We're still like every outlet on their own, and therefore I feel, and I'm very, very keen that in fact, one of the groups that I wanted to reach out to was this women from Assam group, to sort of look at the how this, what sort of fear and anxiety and the kind of double burden, or triple burden rather. You have work, you have home, and then you have the state, the blows of the state. So what sort of triple burdens, and how they coping with it? What are the ways in which we can document that? But also, one of the projects that we wanted to undertake in February was to sort of archive the voices of women at all these protest sites, like Shaheen Bagh and others, and everywhere. And we had there was these young researchers from the Ambedkar University who were very keen on collaborating and working with us on that, and they were very enthusiastic. But what happened was the Delhi pogrom. So, and then as you know, one thing led to like the snowballing of things. So we could never get to that. But once, I think we are going to sort of revive that project, where we would be archiving the voices, but new things are emerging now, right? So earlier it was the fear of the NRC and CA and exclusion, or citizenizing. I don't know what the word is, but you get what I'm saying. Disenfranchisement and so on from the country. But now, additional to that is, I mean, it's the same set of people who are going to be are the targets of another layer of communalism, another layer of state oppression. A lot of them, as you know, are being arrested and put in jails under all sorts of obnoxious laws. And so we're going to. Apart from that, we also want to document what it is that women that were once at the forefront of the protests. What sort of new levels of anxiety are they having to sort of undertake and like bear the burden of? So those are the two things I think I can think of. Of course, possibilities are immense. So if your audience has any other ways in which we could look at these issues, I'd be so happy to hear them.
So I know we are coming close to the end, but we have a lot of questions. Do you both have a few more minutes to answer them? Can we go on? Is that okay?
Sure, sure.
Okay, so again, first, please, we will put links to both the work that Sunil and Bhanupriya and their respective organizations do. Please do reach out to them if there are collaborative prospects and projects. And again, any organization that you feel that the Polis Project should be amplifying at this point in time, please get in touch with us and we'll be glad to do it. Sunil and Bhanupriya, we have a lot of questions coming in about protests, especially about the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm kind of clubbing a bunch of these questions because they have a very similar tone, is that seeing the Black Lives Matter movement erupt and in some ways push for change, and we can see change happening even as they put for it. Something like defunding the police stations is now no longer a rhetoric, people are actually pushing for it. In India, can we today mobilize something? I know there is COVID, but if we are going to die, would we rather die at the foot of an authoritarian regime? I'm just quoting the question. Or do we die of COVID? I know these are difficult choices, but how do we get back on the street? How do we get that doing? How do we go back and protest this state? So that's the kind of questions. People are quite invested. So the questions broadly, can we create or replicate or try to learn from the Black Lives Matter protests that's happening and spreading around the world? If so, how do we move forward given COVID is now, COVID is a serious crisis and it is going to create, we already have a lot of people who've died. If both of you, again, there are two questions, so please feel free to answer them and take them and address them as in how you feel.
Yeah, I could.
Sure.
All right. So I'll be brief because one of the things, even Sunil, when you were talking about the resistance map and so on, I know we have a particular idea of what resistance means, of a particular kind of resistance, but this is one thing I read somewhere, and I thought it meant, it had a meaning to it, that even the migrants walking back, just the act of walking back is an act of resistance. So therefore resistance comes in several forms, shapes, and and therefore, so like I said, I think one, yes, we need to resist, but but in what forms and who, and and how do we, what role do different sections of the society, different sort of different stakeholders in the society, different people in the society, what role can we all be undertaking at where we have to balance between the health concerns as well as this, but yes, one thing is sure, that I feel we, as I said before, that I think we got to be very, very alert, and we've got to use all the mediums we have in our hand, given the larger this thing of the pandemic and the health concerns that, or the health kind of conditions that the governments have put on us as well. So I think we've got to be very creative in our modes of resistance as well. But should we resist, and should we resist the might of the state? At all times. At all times we just need to find the ways to resist, and the most appropriate one at the moment for that. And should we be taking to the streets at a time like this? See, I'm no one to answer that, because if the situation demands, and if our freedoms are at stake, and so on, I think we should. We definitely should. But we should at all times keep resisting in the ways we can, and in the forms we've got.
Sunil?
I mean, this is a question that I guess most of us are grappling with. I mean, I guess none of us have a definitive answer to it. But yeah, I mean, solidarity to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. But I mean, I just want to go back to the map and give you few examples where I guess, I mean, in one way or the other, the act of resistance. I mean, yeah, obviously, the act of, defying the rules imposed upon them of not don't move and walking back home is something that should be characterized as resistance as well. I mean, this the definition of resistance is something which we also haven't been fully able to settle, actually, I mean, to be very honest. But going back uh, to some of the protests that I would wish to highlight that have happened. I mean, there was one protest, I guess, on 28th or 29th April, in the construction site within the IIT Hyderabad campus. I mean, workers largely from Jharkhand, and who were working with a major multinational construction company, came out asking for their wages, demanding that they should be sent home. Uh, if I mean, not many people know it, but the first Shramik special train that was run on May 1st, on the wee hours of May 1st from Hyderabad to Ranchi, carried most of the people from the IIT Hyderabad construction site. I think even the act of the government allowing them to go back home is that right has been secured through hard struggles that the migrant workers have undertaken in various parts of the country. I mean, none of the marginal uh, rights that the government has granted are something which it has given out of benevolence. I mean, the true struggle, sustained struggles of the migrant workers have actually given whatever little that they could achieve so far. I mean, there were huge migrant workers protests in the first week of May right across the country, where they were in fact the Karnataka government in fact stalled Shramik special trains. It came out with an order uh, like stopping the scheduled Shramik special trains because the construction lobby in Karnataka uh, was uh, was pressurizing the government to not let the migrant workers go back home because they would face shortage of labor, which was also overturned. I mean, because of large scale protests that have erupted. I mean, even Tamil Nadu government in some time was dilly-dallying with to take out a similar circular, but with thousands of migrant workers coming onto streets in various parts of the state, that the Tamil Nadu government uh, held back and allowed them to go back home. Also, I mean, uh, even I think yeah, I think I lost track of it, but yeah, that's pretty much.
I think we are coming. I think we're almost at about at an hour mark. So what I'm going to do is, as we get more questions, I'm going to put it to you offline so that perhaps you can also respond to them. This is one last question for both of you, and then we can go into our concluding remarks. Is that we have another question that's come in again from one of the audience in Chicago who says, in the United States, a lot of the organizing that I have gotten involved in happens as we reach out to our elected representatives. There are phone banking, there are writings, there are bots that are now created to send emails, and I think these have helped with the BLM protests. Are these tactics and techniques, is it possible to replicate these tactics and techniques in India? Can Indians, especially privileged upper class Indians, say be a part of it and do these phone bankings, writing to your elected representatives? Um, yeah, is that something? Is that a tactic that can actually work in India? Has it been implemented before? Okay, how do we do it? Is there a way for us as a tool of resistance and a tool of pushing back?
Actually, I'd like to come in on that one, mainly because it's so close to my heart. So in 2012, actually, the government of India, this seems so long ago, it was a different government, different times and everything. In 2012, government of India at that time, led by the UPA, Manmohan Singh, oh gosh, how long has it been? Led by
I mean, it's been
Manmohan.
hard 6 years for this country, so
Yeah,
it keeps
can
changing.
you believe it? We've forgotten everything. We've forgotten ways of resistance also. But now, very interesting that this person, your audience member, did bring this up because, and I go back to 2012 because at that time the government wanted to amend the RTI Act, an act that's loved by Indians because it came up a really, really hard way. It was really a people's act. And at that time, they wanted to exempt the political parties from coming under the purview of the RTI Act. And at that time, and I say this is a very different time because, of course, you will see why. Because at that time, what some of us did, and a whole lot of us did, based everywhere, was we started calling our representatives, our MPs, and started asking them what their position on this amendment was, because you touch any act but you do not touch the RTI Act. It's as simple as that. For no, you don't touch any other act as well, if it makes sense. But yes, because we were all part of the RTI movement and stuff, so we said we kind of we got in touch, and every day we had divided up, and we'd get in touch, we'd talk to them, we'd ask them what their position was, and we'd tell them that, look, we are calling you because we don't want you to amend the RTI Act. And so after a point, it had snowballed into a sort of it wasn't a street-led movement or anything, although there were, in other areas, people had come out on the streets and sort of also protested, but some of the methods that your audience member is talking about have been already sort of taken recourse to, and so there and I say it was a different time because I feel it was possible. We could talk to the MPs. We could, at least there was, even if they didn't, because we have a anti-defection law in place. So even if they can't go against the whip of the parties, we could hear the voices of dissent. I remember the RJD minister who was totally vehemently against the amendment of the act, Raghuvansh Prasad Singh, and he said so. He said so to us, or Sharad Yadav, and people like that. Then about last year, again, the RTI Act came up for amendment, and we tried doing the same thing, like getting in touch with our MPs and calling them, and and now a lot of them were on social media as well. At that time, they weren't on social media, so we tried doing any of that. But these are different times. These are like such. We felt the difference between talking to a administration that was willing to even let us sort of our voices come through, to an administration that just is is so opaque. It's like a wall, and it's basically, we try because it's our job to try. Maybe we tried even till the last minute that the last vote went up in the parliament. So we tried. But we also, back of our minds, knew that this wasn't going to happen. So yes, these methods have been implemented. It's just that the administrations are so different. They're just so opaque and heartless, is all I can say. So activism of this variety is becoming a little tougher.
As we come to the end of this, Sunil, do you want to respond to this question?
Yeah, I mean, slightly tangentially perhaps, but yes, I mean, obviously we need to be creative in our activism. That's huge need of the hour. I mean, for instance, I mean, with regards to I mean, more privileged sections of the society. I mean, advocacy has an important role, limited but important role in activism as well. For instance, I mean, on behalf of Migrant Workers Solidarity Network, we have been pushing for a comprehensive legal framework for migrant workers, which covers both the citizenship rights as well as their workplace rights. I mean, citizenship rights. I mean, as basic citizenship right as as an act of voting, as a right of voting, is effectively denied to migrant workers. I mean, forget about the substantive rights like housing, healthcare, food, water. I mean, uh, the right to food should be made portable. That's one demand that we are pushing forward. So, I mean, there is a huge need for, I mean, also because of the shift in the nature of society that we are living in. I mean, there is actually a requirement of, I mean, variety of lawyers, journalists, researchers that would help in the larger movement as well in substantive ways. Yeah.
I think we're at about a little over the 1 hour mark, so we're coming to the end of it. So I was wondering before we end if both of you could end with your concluding remarks, issues that we should think about, and other issues that you want to raise.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, our organization's point of view, we would want to document the gendered nature of this pandemic, and all the fallouts of the pandemic, and some of which I already mentioned. So I'd rather put out a call through your platform, Suchitra. If people think there are issues we should be looking at, and how we should be looking at, the organizations that we should be collaborating with, and anyone who wants to collaborate with us, we are happy to. So, because I think this cannot be done at either an individual or even an organization's level, and probably this is an opportunity for us to also display some sort of, or rather, like they keep saying about this proof of concept business, like build a sort of a proof of concept, for want of a better word, of how people, like organizations and people, can collaborate, which is what I find extremely interesting about the migrant solidarity people. Your group and the Stranded Workers Network and everyone, they just came together, and look at the amount of documentation they've done. Some very important work, and I feel that that's what we need to do as well, because some of these impacts are going to be so nuanced, some of them very apparent. So one of the things we just quickly want to say that we want to track is the job losses of women, especially in small scale industries and garment factories and so on and so forth. So we want to track that. So if you have any ideas and how we can get data and how we can track that, I'd be very grateful, and I would love to collaborate on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, on a similar note, I mean, yeah, obviously, I mean, with the nature of the enormity of this challenge we have right in front of us, I mean, united and uncompromising struggles are the only way forward in dealing with this particular challenge. Especially so, even we have seen how the government has put behind bars activists uh, who have participated in the anti-CAA movement on fabricated charges. I mean, and under draconian UAPA as well, including a couple of friends and comrades of mine as well. I mean, more power to them. Uh, uh, this phase shall pass. But yeah, I mean, we invite all uh, uh, as much collaboration as possible in this particular effort endeavor of ours. Yeah, thank you.
Sunil and Bhanupriya, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your work. And again, the philosophy of Polis Project is also built as a collective, which means that everybody who's part of the organization owns the organization. And for us, one of the things that's been the shining light in these dark and depressing times is just the amount of remarkable people and communities that are coming together to work. So, again, to all of you out there doing the work, thank you. And please do reach out to Sunil and Bhanupriya. And any ways that, as Polis as an organization, as a collective, or as individuals, we can help, please give us a shout out. And again, to all of those currently detained under the draconian UAPA and others, as Sunil says, this too shall pass. Thank you.